This video would be too long if I tried to explain net neutrality and its history, so if you need to brush up on it, I will have some videos linked below on the screen. On November 21st, 2017, the Federal Communications Commission released their proposal on repealing net neutrality. What this basically means is that your internet service provider will be legally allowed to slow down streaming sites that require high bandwidth to use, such as Twitch, Netflix, Hulu, and YouTube. They can prevent you from using sites or viewing content that your provider does not approve of, and they can set up fast lanes that basically function as a toll road for accessing specific websites that pay ISPs a fee, which is prioritizing their content over others. There is also a transparency requirement, meaning that the public has the right to know which sites are taking advantage of the absence of net neutrality. Wow, this is awesome, right? I love transparency. Well, yeah, sure, but it's not of much use to the public if there's nothing we can do about it. One common solution that gets thrown around is the idea that the free market will sort itself out. People can just, switch to a different service provider if they don't like their current one. The problem with this is that 61% of consumers only have one ISP in their area, and a small fraction has the luxury of two ISPs. Amongst all this chaos, however, is something that you should know. On November 16th, 2017, the FCC repealed and revamped 3 media ownership laws that could possibly destroy the future of unbiased media as we know it. The first of these laws is the Newspaper Broadcast Cross-Ownership Rule of 1975. Here's a little history. In the early 70s, with the surge of broadcasting stations arriving at your television, bringing you the latest local and global news, came a threat to local newspapers. Broadcasting stations have a resource that sets broadcasters at an advantage to newspapers, which are infinite radio waves. If a broadcasting station like Fox or CNN or your local news network had their own newspaper as well as their station during this time, they would be unfairly saturating the media with their own coverage of news. To ensure that small local newspapers stood a chance against their components in the deliverance of news through the media, the FCC implemented the NBCO rule of 1975. This meant that broadcast stations could not own a newspaper in the same market, which in return would ensure that a diversity of viewpoints would be accessible and heard by the public. Beautiful. But as you know, the newspaper market has been in serious decline in the past decade. The emergence of online outlets such as social media sites offer a more convenient way of accessing news, allowing infinite viewpoints to be heard and discussed. Since people were not utilizing print newspaper as much as these internet sites, ad revenue in both print and digital newspapers saw a drastic decline, making the market for newspapers virtually obsolete. Okay, so it's 2017, newspapers aren't really a thing anymore. We recognize that consumers get their information elsewhere online. Why does it matter to abolish this rule that prohibits broadcasters from owning newspapers? Wait for it. The second rule that the FCC decided to repeal is the Radio-Television Cross-Ownership Rule. This rule was put in place to prohibit any one entity from owning more than 2 TV stations and 1 radio station in the same market. If the market has at least 10 independent media voices, then one entity is only permitted the opportunity to own 2 TV stations and 4 radio stations. The FCC decided to repeal this rule. They state again the intent of the rule was to promote a diversity of viewpoints in the media realm. However, they argue that this premise is no longer applicable because we have other means, i.e. the internet, of hearing diverse viewpoints. Radio and television are mainly utilized for entertainment purposes such as listening to music and watching TV shows, so it doesn't really matter anymore. But let's be honest, we mostly stream our shows from Netflix and Hulu and use Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Music to stream our music. So why does it matter to repeal this law? Would it even make a difference if we just relax this rule and let it be rather than abolishing it? And lastly, the third rule that was revised was the local television ownership rule. This rule contains two specific provisions that the FCC has revised. One is the 8 voices test, and the other is the top 4 prohibition. The 8 voices test prohibits the merging of television stations, specifically local television stations, unless there are at least 8 independent stations present in the market. The FCC decided to do away with the 8 voices test, allowing any local TV stations to merge regardless the number of stations in the market. The top 4 prohibition prohibits a company or entity from owning no more than one of the top 4 stations, which are CBS, NBC, ABC, and Fox. They revised the top 4 prohibition, which now allows applicants the ability to request case-by-case review of their proposed combination of 2 of the top 4 stations. So, what does this all mean? If media ownership can now be bought and sold without these restrictions, we face the potential of a controlled bias media. Not saying that the media isn't biased as we know it, but we run the risk of having an even more controlled bias media. Hear me out. This isn't very likely, but hypothetically speaking, one person can buy, let's say, NBC and CBS, 7 TV stations, and 50 radio stations. NBC and CBS can have their own newspaper, and local TV stations can be incentivized to merge into one conglomerate whole. The FCC has just made it more convenient for the wealthy elite to control the traditional media that for decades has delivered information and news to our doorstep. Now, think of this. If the repeal of net neutrality goes into effect, it will be more difficult to access the sites and outlets we used as substitutes and tools to get our daily news, especially for those who are not able to afford to pay for access to these sites. So where else are we the people left to turn for our news and information? Broadcasting stations, radio, and newspapers, all of which are now able to be owned by single entities, controlled and censored. In the description below, I'll have links to all of the information that I accessed to come to this conclusion, or not necessarily conclusion, but arguably conspiracy theory. If you'd like to check them out and read for yourself, they'll be down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time.